The year was 1942. On Guadalcanal's sweltering, malarial battlefields, Marine Private Robert Leckie of the 1st Marine Division made a stark, recurring observation. American forces engaged Imperial Japanese troops in savage, close-quarters combat. A fundamental physical disparity became undeniably evident. Leckie and countless other U.S. servicemen noted their Japanese adversaries were, on average, significantly smaller in stature and appeared less robust. This was no mere biological distinction. It was an early, visceral symptom of a profound systemic vulnerability. This factor would fatally undermine Japan's war effort in the Pacific. These initial encounters established a pattern. The small stature observed by Leckie was not simply a genetic trait. Instead, it was a potent visual indicator of chronic malnutrition and inadequate logistical support. These issues plagued Japanese forces from the campaign's earliest days. While the samurai spirit and ferocity of Japanese resistance were undeniable, their physical capabilities were systematically eroded long before they faced American firepower. This overlooked asymmetry, often masked by the intense brutality of jungle warfare, fundamentally shaped the tactical realities and human cost of the Pacific theater. The numerical data underpinning this physical disparity is crucial. Official records from both the United States and Imperial Japan provide a stark contrast. An average American infantryman during World War II stood approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall and typically weighed between 150 and 160 pounds. Conversely, the typical Japanese soldier measured closer to 5 feet 4 inches, with an average body weight hovering around 120 pounds. This 4-inch height difference and 30 to 40-pound weight differential represented a substantial biological divergence between the opposing forces. It was not merely a matter of stature. It encompassed a generally smaller bone structure and less developed musculature, directly impacting their physical resilience. These anatomical distinctions translated into tangible operational challenges. The average fighting load of an infantryman, comprising weapons, ammunition, rations, and personal gear, often approached 60 pounds. Consider the physics. A soldier weighing 120 pounds, carrying a 60-pound load, is undertaking a far more strenuous task than one weighing 160 pounds with the identical burden. This disparity directly affected endurance during forced marches across rugged, malarial landscapes. Handling heavier crew-served weapons, such as the Type 92 heavy machine gun, became physically more demanding. Less inherent muscle mass and smaller frames created a significant hurdle. These biological factors, while not individually decisive, collectively established a foundational physical disadvantage for the Imperial Japanese Army from the very outset of the Pacific War. The brutal campaign for Guadalcanal began on August 7, 1942. American landings quickly established a foothold. Initial skirmishes soon revealed a grim reality for the U.S. Marine Corps. Beyond the dense jungle and relentless combat, an insidious foe manifested among the Imperial Japanese Army: starvation. Robert Leckie with the 1st Marine Division witnessed these early indicators firsthand. On August 21, 1942, the Ichiki detachment launched a desperate frontal assault. This occurred during the pivotal battle of the Tenaru River. Marines from their entrenched positions decisively repelled the attack. They inflicted approximately 800 casualties on the 917-man force. The grim task of policing the battlefield followed, revealing a chilling discovery for Leckie and his comrades. Among the fallen Japanese soldiers, many were not merely small. They were alarmingly emaciated. Their bodies bore clear signs of prolonged nutritional deprivation. Leckie later recounted, they were skin and bones. These observations were not isolated anomalies, they were harbingers. The skeletal remains indicated a profound logistical failure had already taken root, evident even at this relatively early stage of the Pacific War. While the Imperial Japanese Army exhibited unwavering resolve and ferocity in combat, their diminishing physical reserves presented an insurmountable tactical handicap. The battle for Guadalcanal was, for these soldiers, not solely a contest against American firepower. It was a desperate struggle against the ravages of hunger and tropical disease. These factors would ultimately claim more lives than direct enemy action. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy, after their stunning early victories across the Pacific in late 1941 and early 1942, discovered their logistical tail was drastically undersized for the vast operational theater they now commanded. This rapidly expanding empire, stretching thousands of miles, placed an impossible burden on a supply chain ill-equipped for sustained long-range operations. The existing infrastructure, geared for continental warfare, simply could not support the myriad island garrisons. A fundamental strategic miscalculation permeated the Japanese high command. Indoctrinated in the tenets of Bushido and Yamato Damashi, leaders often prioritized unyielding fighting spirit over the mundane realities of material support. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commander on Iwo Jima, famously noted the disregard for logistics in earlier campaigns, stating, "If we fight with only spirit, victory cannot be obtained." This over-reliance on individual courage to compensate for material deficiencies was a fatal flaw, directly contrasting with the American doctrine of overwhelming firepower and robust supply lines. The Allied response swiftly exploited this weakness. The United States Navy's unrestricted submarine warfare, initiated early in the conflict, systematically decimated Japanese merchant shipping. By 1944, the relentless campaign had sunk millions of tons of vital cargo, including food, fuel, and medical supplies, directly severing lifelines to distant island garrisons. The Allied air interdiction efforts, alongside naval blockades, further choked off supply routes, making even short-range resupply missions increasingly hazardous. A single voyage could determine the survival of an entire detachment. Deprived of regular resupply, the soldiers on remote outposts like Guadalcanal faced endemic starvation and rampant tropical diseases such as malaria and dysentery, exacerbated by the acute shortage of quinine and other essential medicines. Records indicate that on Guadalcanal alone, over 20,000 Japanese soldiers perished, with disease and hunger claiming far more lives than direct combat action. These skeletal figures, observed by Robert Leckie, were not merely a consequence of isolated battles. They were the direct, tragic outcome of a national logistical system stretched beyond its capacity and ultimately severed by an industrially superior enemy. The caloric deficit faced by many Japanese troops in the Pacific was catastrophic, directly undermining their physical capacity for sustained combat. Jungle warfare demanded immense stamina, yet soldiers often subsisted on less than 1,000 calories daily, a fraction of the roughly 3,000 calories consumed by their American counterparts. This severe malnutrition drastically reduced their endurance for arduous marches across the unforgiving terrain of Guadalcanal or New Guinea. A soldier weakened by hunger struggled to maintain formation during a multi-day advance, inevitably slowing the unit's operational tempo. A single voyage could determine the survival of an entire detachment. Deprived of regular resupply, the soldiers on remote outposts like Guadalcanal faced endemic starvation and rampant tropical diseases such as malaria and dysentery, exacerbated by the acute shortage of quinine and other essential medicines. Records indicate that on Guadalcanal alone, over 20,000 Japanese soldiers perished, with disease and hunger claiming far more lives than direct combat action. These skeletal figures, observed by Robert Leckie, were not merely a consequence of isolated battles. They were the direct, tragic outcome of a national logistical system stretched beyond its capacity and ultimately severed by an industrially superior enemy. The caloric deficit faced by many Japanese troops in the Pacific was catastrophic, directly undermining their physical capacity for sustained combat. Jungle warfare demanded immense stamina, yet soldiers often subsisted on less than 1,000 calories daily, a fraction of the roughly 3,000 calories consumed by their American counterparts. This severe malnutrition drastically reduced their endurance for arduous marches across the unforgiving terrain of Guadalcanal or New Guinea. A soldier weakened by hunger struggled to maintain formation during a multi-day advance, inevitably slowing the unit's operational tempo. Moreover, diminished physical strength directly impacted their ability to carry essential equipment. A Type 92 heavy machine gun, weighing over 60 kilograms with its tripod, became an insurmountable burden for men whose muscle mass was rapidly wasting. Even lighter loads, like ammunition crates or mortar rounds, exhausted them quickly. This physical degradation inevitably impaired tactical decision-making. A mind clouded by lethargy and nutrient deficiency could not process rapidly evolving combat situations with optimal clarity. Eugene Sledge, observing Japanese prisoners on Peleliu, noted their gaunt appearance, a stark testament to their chronic starvation, yet they still fought with ferocious resolve. The pervasive malnutrition also degraded cognitive function. Exhaustion clouded tactical judgment. The insidious consequences extended to disease susceptibility. Malnutrition crippled the immune system, transforming common tropical ailments like malaria and dysentery into rampant, deadly epidemics within the Japanese ranks. Recovery from even minor injuries became protracted, often leading to fatal infections due to the body's inability to fight pathogens effectively. Post-war analyses of medical reports confirmed that on islands such as Bougainville, non-combat disease and starvation fatalities significantly outnumbered those killed by Allied action. Every engagement thus became a desperate struggle, not merely against an overwhelming foe, but against the brutal, constant enemy of their own ravaged bodies. By September 1944, the theater of conflict had shifted westward, bringing American forces to Peleliu, an island fortress of immense strategic value. Among the United States Marines who landed there was Eugene B. Sledge, a mortarman with the 1st Marine Division whose poignant memoirs would later provide an unvarnished window into the Pacific Inferno. Peleliu's defenders, primarily elements of the 14th Division under Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, had meticulously prepared a defense in depth, transforming the island's coral ridges and caves into a formidable network of mutually supporting positions. Despite the Japanese commitment to a protracted, uncompromising defense, Sledge's observations revealed a deepening physical degradation among their ranks. He recounted encountering enemy combatants, even those fighting with incredible resolve from their entrenched positions, who appeared gaunt, their bodies withered by sustained deprivation. The Americans noted their adversaries were often small in stature, but on Peleliu, this natural characteristic was tragically compounded by the profound effects of malnourishment. In his seminal work, With the Old Breed at Peleliu and Okinawa, Sledge vividly depicted the enemy's physical state. He wrote of prisoners who were mere skeletons, barely able to stand, their bodies ravaged, yet whose eyes still burned with fanaticism. This stark dichotomy highlighted the profound disparity between their physical capability and their indomitable will. This visual evidence of severe emaciation confirmed that even seasoned, deeply entrenched units were grappling with the pervasive logistical failures that had plagued their forces since Guadalcanal. Their smaller frames, already a tactical disadvantage in some respects, became acutely vulnerable under such extreme physiological stress, limiting their endurance and overall effectiveness in sustained engagements. Yet their tenacity remained legendary. They fought from every cave and crevice, exacting a high price from the American assault forces. The intense fighting, particularly in the Omobrobo pocket, underscored a grim reality. Even a starved soldier, well entrenched, could mount a fierce, protracted resistance. The fundamental physical disparities between American and Japanese combatants extended beyond mere endurance, crucially impacting the practical interaction with the instruments of war. While Japanese industrial design produced formidable firearms, the average stature of their soldiers often presented significant challenges in effectively wielding heavier crew-served weapons. Consider the Type 92 heavy machine gun. This robust and highly effective weapon weighed approximately 55 kilograms or 121 pounds with its tripod. Operating such formidable equipment required substantial physical strength. Transport across the rugged, often mountainous terrain of the Pacific Islands was a constant challenge. Smaller gun crews struggled to maintain sustained rates of fire or rapidly reposition the weapon during intense engagements. This was a critical disadvantage in dynamic battlefields. Even the Type 99 light machine gun, though more manageable, still demanded considerable physical exertion from its operators. This was particularly true when coupled with ammunition belts and spare barrels. For a soldier with a lower average body mass, the cumulative strain was immense. Carrying this weapon, along with personal gear, water, and ammunition for their standard Type 99 Arisaka rifle, itself weighing nearly 4 kilograms, translated into accelerated fatigue. This was not a minor inconvenience. It directly compromised their agility and responsiveness in crucial moments of close-quarters combat. The ergonomic challenges were pervasive. Helmets designed for a general population often proved cumbersome, potentially obscuring peripheral vision or causing discomfort during long patrols. Standard-issue boots, while durable, could become leaden weights on smaller feet. This exacerbated the already brutal effects of jungle rot and prolonged exposure to water. Such seemingly minor discrepancies in scale held profound tactical implications. American forces, with their larger average build, could operate heavy weapons like flamethrowers, the M22, weighing 65 pounds when full, being a prime example, with greater ease. They could sustain operations for longer durations. This capacity allowed them to exploit specific tactical opportunities, such as clearing entrenched positions, more effectively. Conversely, the Japanese soldier, already battling the debilitating effects of malnutrition, found his physical limitations amplified. Equipment, by its very nature, was taxing. This subtle mismatch of scale reduced tactical flexibility. It impeded rapid maneuver. It further eroded the combat effectiveness of units already operating under immense duress. The very tools meant to empower them often became additional burdens. This was a stark reminder of the broader logistical and physical asymmetries that defined their desperate struggle. This struggle directly reshaped the tactical doctrine of the Imperial Japanese Army, shifting away from aggressive conventional engagements towards desperate close-quarters combat. Confronted with overwhelming American firepower and severe ammunition shortages, Japanese commanders frequently resorted to the bayonet charge as a primary offensive action. A Japanese infantryman, often weighing under 120 pounds, could not effectively wield a heavy machine gun for extended periods. Nor could they carry the vast quantities of ammunition for sustained firefights. Consequently, the close-in melee became a tactical imperative. This desperation culminated in the notorious banzai charges, particularly evident in battles like Saipan in July 1944. Thousands of Japanese troops, exhausted and starving, would launch suicidal human wave attacks, attempting to overrun American positions. These charges, while demonstrating immense resolve, rarely achieved their objectives against well-entrenched, better-equipped U.S. forces, resulting in catastrophic losses. On Saipan, for instance, over 4,000 Japanese soldiers died in one such charge, considered the largest of the Pacific War. However, the most significant tactical evolution occurred in defense. Recognizing the futility of conventional resistance against American naval and air superiority, Japanese strategists, notably General Tadamichi Kuribayashi on Iwo Jima, abandoned traditional beach defenses. Instead, his 21,000 defenders meticulously constructed a labyrinthine network of over 11 miles of tunnels, caves, and more than 1,500 fortified positions. This allowed them to absorb continuous artillery and aerial bombardments, emerging to engage U.S. Marines at close range, often from hidden firing ports. This burrowing strategy effectively negated the numerical and technological advantages of the Allied forces for extended periods. On Iwo Jima, the Marines anticipated securing the island in 5 days. Instead, the fight lasted 36 days, resulting in over 26,000 American casualties. The smaller physical stature of Japanese soldiers, though a disadvantage for carrying heavy gear, might have inadvertently aided the construction and navigation of these confined subterranean systems. This enabled them to maximize defensive capabilities. The sheer will to fight to the last man, coupled with these ingenious defenses, transformed each island into a death trap. While these adaptations prolonged resistance and inflicted severe casualties on Allied forces, they were ultimately reactive strategies born of desperation, not paths to victory. They highlighted the Imperial Japanese Army's inability to project power or sustain offensive operations against a technologically superior adversary. Each successful delay was purchased with the lives of virtually every defender, underscoring the unsustainable nature of their war effort. The tactics merely shifted the location and duration of their inevitable defeat rather than altering its outcome. Beyond the relentless shelling and close-quarters combat, an insidious enemy stalked the Imperial Japanese forces in the Pacific: disease. Malaria, dysentery, and dengue fever ravaged their ranks, transforming tropical islands into vast open-air infirmaries. These silent epidemics, often exacerbated by the very environment they fought in, frequently claimed an astonishing toll, surpassing combat casualties. The already malnourished state of the Japanese soldier, a direct consequence of catastrophic logistical failures, rendered them profoundly vulnerable. With immune systems compromised, a simple infection could become a death sentence. Dysentery, for instance, led to rapid dehydration and exhaustion. Severe malaria attacks incapacitated entire platoons. Men just fell out of formation, one veteran later recounted, unable to move. Compounding this crisis was the woefully inadequate medical infrastructure. Unlike the well-equipped Allied forces, Japanese field hospitals often lacked basic medicines, sanitation, or even sufficient clean water. Quinine, a vital anti-malarial, was a rare commodity. For a wounded soldier, already weakened by chronic hunger and endemic disease, the prognosis was grim. Many perished not from their initial injuries, but from subsequent infection or the brutal lack of follow-up care. On Guadalcanal, the 17th Army's experience became a stark illustration of this reality. Out of approximately 31,000 Japanese troops deployed, an estimated 20,000 perished. Only around 8,000 were attributed to direct combat action. The remaining 12,000 succumbed to starvation and disease, a testament that their true adversary was often unseen. This devastating ratio was replicated across numerous island campaigns, from New Guinea to Bougainville, where the jungle itself became a more formidable foe than any American Marine. Despite these overwhelming biological challenges and the near certainty of death from either disease or combat, the Japanese soldiers' fighting spirit frequently remained unbroken. Their tenacity, even in the throes of severe illness and starvation, often astonished Allied opponents. They noted a continued willingness to launch suicidal banzai charges. This unwavering resolve, even as their bodies failed them, underscores a complex interplay between physical endurance and deeply ingrained cultural imperatives, a factor often underestimated in purely logistical analyses. Yet, raw courage alone could not overcome the biological and medical realities that systematically eroded their strength and ultimately sealed their fate. The Battle of Tarawa in November 1943 offered a vivid counterpoint. Here, the Japanese defenders, under Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki, were comparatively well supplied. They were ready. Approximately 4,500 Imperial Navy Special Naval Landing Force personnel had transformed Betio Atoll into a formidable bastion. These troops possessed sufficient rations, water, and ammunition alongside better, albeit still limited, medical provisions. These prepared conditions enabled a level of resistance that shocked American forces. Marines attempting to secure Betio faced an almost impenetrable network of concrete pillboxes, reinforced bunkers, and intricate trench lines. The well-fed and equipped Japanese troops could sustain prolonged engagements. They fired with precision and tenacity. Marine losses were exceptionally high. Over 1,000 Americans perished and more than 2,000 were wounded during just 76 hours of fighting. This was not the same emaciated, disease-ridden opponent encountered elsewhere. The contrast was striking. Where soldiers on Guadalcanal succumbed to starvation and malaria, the Tarawa garrison fought until virtually the last man. Vice Admiral Shibazaki famously declared, "1 million men couldn't take Tarawa in 100 years." He was overly optimistic. However, his troops certainly embodied that spirit. This critical distinction offered a clear glimpse into how a more robust logistical infrastructure could have fundamentally reshaped Imperial forces across the Pacific theater. It underscored that the inherent fighting spirit of the Japanese soldier, when coupled with adequate support, yielded an opponent of unparalleled resilience. However, even superior local logistics could not alter the strategic outcome. Tarawa, despite its rigorous defense, was ultimately an isolated outpost. Resupply during the battle was impossible. American air and naval dominance ensured that while the defenders were well supplied prior to the invasion, this advantage rapidly faded. The sheer numerical superiority and overwhelming firepower of the U.S. Marine Corps, supported by extensive naval bombardment and aerial assaults, meant the island's fall was inevitable. The battle's ferocity, therefore, highlighted the immense human cost of overcoming such a well-prepared defense, rather than suggesting a path to Japanese victory. It demonstrated that even an optimally provisioned Japanese garrison would eventually be crushed by the sheer weight of American combat power. The Battle of Okinawa, commencing on April 1, 1945, represented the tragic culmination of the Japanese soldiers' ordeal. This invasion, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, pitted over 300,000 Allied personnel against approximately 100,000 Imperial Army and Okinawan conscripts under Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima. By this stage, the Japanese forces were not merely outgunned, they were physically decimated. Years of catastrophic logistical failures, persistent malnutrition, and widespread disease had fundamentally eroded their combat effectiveness. Every engagement became a fight against not only the invading Americans, but also their own deteriorating bodies. Chronic malnutrition had rendered many Japanese soldiers frail, their average body weight significantly below combat readiness standards. Dysentery, malaria, and beriberi ravaged the ranks, further depleting stamina and cognitive function. Such physical degradation directly impacted critical combat tasks. Soldiers struggled to rapidly dig defensive positions in the island's rocky terrain. They couldn't efficiently carry heavy artillery shells or ammunition for sustained fire, and demonstrated reduced sprint capabilities during desperate counterattacks. This pervasive physical decline meant that the inherent disadvantages of smaller average stature first observed on Guadalcanal had now reached an acute systemic crisis. Consequently, the psychological despair among Japanese troops on Okinawa became profound. They fought a predetermined battle, aware of the overwhelming Allied naval and air superiority, with little hope of reinforcement or evacuation. The finality of their situation contributed to an exceptionally low survival rate. Out of approximately 100,000 Japanese combatants, around 110,000 military deaths were recorded, including many Okinawan conscripts. Only about 7,400 were taken prisoner. This grim statistic starkly illustrates the depth of their commitment to a fight to the death, even when physically broken. Despite these profound physical and logistical handicaps, the Japanese defense of Okinawa demonstrated an extraordinary, almost fanatical resolve. Lieutenant General Ushijima's forces masterfully utilized the island's rugged terrain. They constructed an intricate system of caves and fortified positions, turning every ridge and village into a bloody strongpoint. American forces faced savage resistance. They incurred over 12,500 killed and approximately 38,000 wounded, making Okinawa the costliest battle for the U.S. in the Pacific theater. This tenacious, suicidal defense, even by men severely weakened, underscored the strategic challenge still posed by a determined, no-surrender enemy. Okinawa thus served as a stark, tragic summation of the human cost stemming from Japan's strategic and logistical vulnerabilities. The individual suffering of its soldiers, exacerbated by years of neglect, reached its zenith here. It underscored a brutal reality for the Imperial Army. Their most committed efforts could not overcome the cumulative impact of systemic failures. This lesson carried grim implications for the potential invasion of the Japanese home islands. Decades after the last shot, American veterans like Robert Leckie and Eugene Sledge transformed their wartime journals into seminal memoirs. Leckie's Enlisted, A Marine's History of the Pacific War, published in 1987, and Sledge's With the Old Breed, At Peleliu and Okinawa, released in 1981, offered unvarnished views from the front lines. Both authors frequently revisited the emaciated forms of their Japanese adversaries encountered on Guadalcanal and Peleliu. Their written accounts underscored a recurring observation: the enemy's physical state was often one of severe deprivation. Sledge, known for his raw honesty, frequently detailed the wretched conditions under which Imperial soldiers fought. He described them as skeletons, often covered with sores, even while acknowledging their ferocity in combat. Leckie's narrative similarly conveyed the grim reality of an enemy weakened by hunger and disease, not merely battlefield casualties. These reflections, penned years later, often transcended the immediate animosity of war, revealing a recognition of a shared struggle against the elements and human endurance pushed to its limits. One Marine, interviewed in 1999 for a documentary, recalled the eerie silence of a captured Japanese position, finding only skeletal remains and empty ration tins. Witnessing such extreme physical deprivation left an indelible psychological imprint on many American servicemen. The images of gaunt, disease-ridden Japanese soldiers, often battling starvation as much as bullets, became a persistent memory. This exposure to widespread human misery, independent of direct combat, contributed significantly to the post-traumatic stress many veterans carried. The lasting impact extended beyond the battlefield. It became a somber reminder of war's indiscriminate ability to reduce all participants to their most basic struggle for survival. General Douglas MacArthur, reflecting on the conflict in 1951, stated, "The soldier, be he friend or foe, is charged with the defense of the helpless and the care of the wounded." Nevertheless, it is crucial to acknowledge that not all American veterans harbored such nuanced post-war reflections. The relentless ferocity of the island campaigns frequently fostered a deep-seated animosity and a necessary dehumanization of the enemy, essential for survival. For many, the Japanese soldier remained the enemy, regardless of their physical suffering. Accounts from the front lines in 1943 or 1944 rarely offered compassion. The immediate objective was neutralization. This complex spectrum of wartime emotion, ranging from grudging respect for tenacity to outright hatred, illustrates the multifaceted psychological landscape of the Pacific theater. Modern military historians examining countless after-action reports and medical records have unequivocally validated the grim observations of Leckie and Sledge. Scholarly consensus now affirms that for the Imperial Japanese Army in the Pacific, disease and starvation far outstripped direct combat as the primary cause of death. Richard B. Frank's definitive work on Guadalcanal meticulously details this catastrophic breakdown. It created an internal enemy. This foe was more pervasive than any Allied bullet. On Guadalcanal alone, an estimated 20,000 Japanese soldiers perished. Of this staggering number, official records and post-war analyses indicate that approximately 2/3 succumbed not to American firepower, but to malaria, dysentery, and starvation. For many, the Japanese soldier remained the enemy, regardless of their physical suffering. For medicine, the physical suffering, the bare heart, and the individual life were not the focus. The immediate objective was neutralization. This complex spectrum of wartime emotion, ranging from grudging respect for tenacity to outright hatred, illustrates the multifaceted psychological landscape of the Pacific theater. Modern military historians, examining countless after-action reports and medical records, have unequivocally validated the grim observations of Leckie and Sledge. Scholarly consensus now affirms that for the Imperial Japanese Army in the Pacific, disease and starvation far outstripped direct combat as the primary cause of death. Richard B. Frank's definitive work on Guadalcanal meticulously details this catastrophic breakdown. It created an internal enemy. This foe was more pervasive than any Allied bullet. On Guadalcanal alone, an estimated 20,000 Japanese soldiers perished. Of this staggering number, official records and post-war analyses indicate that approximately 2/3 succumbed not to American firepower, but to malaria, dysentery, and starvation. Similar patterns emerged across subsequent island campaigns. In New Guinea, the non-combat death toll was equally devastating. Entire divisions were effectively neutralized before ever engaging the enemy in significant numbers. One regimental commander reported, "Our men are dying like flies, not from American guns, but from empty stomachs and fever." These silent killers rendered even the most fanatical resolve utterly impotent. Yet, it is crucial to acknowledge that this widespread deprivation did not equate to an easy victory for the Allied forces. Even severely malnourished and plagued by illness, Japanese soldiers displayed extraordinary tenacity. Their desperate, often suicidal resistance on islands like Palaleo and Iwo Jima inflicted immense casualties on the United States Marine Corps. The development of deep interconnected tunnel systems and the adoption of no-surrender tactics, even by ghost-like figures, forced American troops to fight for every inch of ground. Their resilience, though ultimately futile, undeniably complicated Allied advances and exacted a brutal price. Ultimately, academic research confirms the inherent vulnerability caused by Japan's strategic overreach and its catastrophic logistical failures. The initial physical disparities observed by soldiers like Leckie became amplified exponentially. A supply chain simply ceased to exist for many frontline units. This systematic neglect, far more than the physical stature of individual soldiers, crippled their combat effectiveness. It sealed the fate of countless thousands. It was a war of attrition where the primary enemy for the Imperial Japanese Army was often its own empty supply lines. Robert Leckie's initial observations on Guadalcanal regarding the slight physique of Japanese soldiers and Eugene Sledge's later accounts of malnutrition on Palaleo were more than just battlefield details. They were glaring symptoms of a much deeper asymmetry. The vast disparity in logistical capability and industrial resources between the two powers. The United States, with its superior industrial output and global supply network, could sustain its troops with full rations, modern equipment, and continuous medical support. In contrast, Imperial Japan, with an economy dependent on imports and vulnerable supply chains, could not do the same for its frontline units. This reality reshaped the landscape of the war. On remote islands where Japanese forces were forced to fight without food, medicine, or replenished ammunition, their resilient fighting spirit and undeniable personal courage could not compensate for the lack of basic materials. Despite the remarkable efforts of commanders like General Tadamichi Kuribayashi on Iwo Jima, who organized a brilliant defense, resource depletion eventually led to a tragic conclusion. A Japanese private wounded on Okinawa in May 1945, facing a shortage of medicine and food, had very little chance of survival. However, it is crucial not to reduce Japan's defeat solely to physical stature or logistical shortages. Early Japanese military strategies, such as the attack on Pearl Harbor, demonstrated boldness and excellent tactical planning. Yet, miscalculations regarding American industrial capacity, a failure to grasp the gravity of total war, and the overextension of strategic goals without secured supply chains undermined every initial success. Their combat capability on battlefields like Tarawa, where Japanese soldiers were better supplied, proved they were a formidable adversary. But such instances became increasingly rare as the war dragged on. The lessons from the Pacific theater remain valid today. Logistics is not merely a support aspect, it is the foundation of combat power. An army, no matter how technologically advanced or high its morale, will quickly weaken and collapse if it cannot sustain its soldiers with food, water, ammunition, and medical care. Modern military campaigns, especially expeditionary operations, serve as a constant reminder of the indispensable importance of sustainable supply chains. Ultimately, the story of the small, starving, and disease-ridden Japanese soldiers fighting to their last breath is a profound reminder of the human cost when support systems fail. It goes beyond military casualty statistics, touching on the personal suffering of hundreds of thousands of soldiers left behind in a war where material deprivation became the fatal enemy. It is a grim legacy of an undeniable truth of warfare. Logistics is always the deciding factor.